You're very welcome to another episode of the Scaling Your Business podcast. For this episode, we're joined by an Irishman, but all the way over in Zagreb, John Brady, CEO and founder at Bowsy. John, you're very welcome to the show.
Right, thanks very much, Rian. Delighted to be here.
Delighted to have you. As we were saying before we hit the record button, conversation for any loyal listeners will know focuses around early influences, challenges, and pivotal moments. So no different with you. I know you're based out in Zagreb at the moment, currently moving home, but home is Dublin, Ireland. So let's go back to the beginning. You grew up in Dublin. Any favorite standout memories of while you were growing up in Dublin?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Dublin. I left Dublin probably 1999. While I was in Ireland, I had a chance to work with my dad's business. My father was originally from the Liberties, grew up in Dublin. He had his own kind of health business going from the 1960s, 1970s. He opened up some gymnasiums, health stores in Drury Street in Dublin. I got involved. Before I left, he had a kind of a small medical manufacturing business in Ireland. He was manufacturing medical disposables and wipes and stuff like that. Um, for for most of his life, he was involved in that, and that's the big memory for me. His dad building his business in Dublin. He was kind of an early entrepreneur before Enterprise Ireland, before he had all the support in the 1960s onwards, and he managed to, I'd say, scrape by a living successfully in Ireland, for all of his life. I was involved in that before I left to go abroad, and I've been working for international companies abroad. I've been living in Iran and Indonesia, spending time in the Middle East, and then more recently spending a lot of time in the UK and Poland, and now I find myself in Croatia. But I've always wanted to come back to Ireland. It's always been difficult as the kind of kids have been growing up, and there would never seem to be a perfect time to go back to Ireland. Either it was boom or bust. It was going to be too expensive, or there weren't the opportunities. And it was probably around 3 years ago I started working on my new business, which is Bowsy, which we kind of
Mm.
launched last year, but been working on it for a while. And the main motivation for that is my daughter now is 18. She's getting ready for university, and I was, I guess, emotionally coming to terms with the fact that she could be studying in Australia or the Netherlands, wherever else. I wanted to go back to Ireland, and that's the plan now. But it was in the process of preparing that we realised that although technology has changed and there's been a lot of progress, the nature of student work hasn't changed, and it's exactly the same as me when I was studying in UCD. I worked in Roger stores, I worked in Burger King, McDonald's, etc. And although things have changed a little bit with the gig economy in terms of flexibility, the nature of student work hasn't changed, and that made me thinking about alternatives. At the time, when we were looking at remote technology and the ability to work remotely, it seemed a bit of a stretch of the imagination, because this is, of course, before the pandemic, when we were having our first conversations, and a lot of companies thought this is a big stretch of the imagination. Number one, working remotely and unsupervised, and then number two, throwing students into the mix, or university students, and obviously attitudes have changed, dramatically because of the lockdown, because of the pandemic. People are looking at it very differently, and
Mm.
that's given us a kind of a huge boost in terms of at least the mindset of some of our customers, and the mindsets of some of the bigger companies towards remote working, and they're looking at it now much more as a kind of an opportunity than they would have before. And that was the main motivation. Was my own daughter, and
Right.
seeing the opportunity that there's a huge untapped digitally savvy smart workforce in university, and we're focusing primarily on kind of final year or postgraduate students who where the need is greatest, for
Mm.
this kind of experience. So not detracting from any of the students working in pubs, bars. That's part of of
Experience.
college life. But we see certainly, there's a huge amount of this of the 70,000 students. I think there's probably 15,000 or more students in their final year or in postgraduate studies, and that's where we see the big opportunity is to tap into them. And
Mm.
Last year, we worked with another startup called Bounce Insights. They came from Trinity College, and they helped us do some kind of quantitative research among students in Ireland to understand, how is the graduate recruitment process going from their perspective? What are the big barriers, to getting employment from their perspectives? And what kind of changes would they like to see? And the biggest barrier the students kind of saw was access to relevant work experience. And I've also been lucky enough in the past 2 years to work with most of our team are either current final year students or recent graduates, and I've gone through the kind of life cycle that the students kind of endure in terms of getting jobs, between not getting a response to an application to being told they not have enough experience. And the biggest thing that came back from the research was the fact that experience or perceived lack of experience was the biggest barrier to them getting the job that they wanted to. And 89% of students that we surveyed saw that they needed an improvement in the graduate recruitment process. And these are students from all over Ireland. And when we asked them, what are the big changes you'd like to see? And we gave them a list, whether it's, more recruitment fairs, more interaction with employers, etc. And the one that they picked was the opportunity to get work experience remotely. And that kind of cemented, from the graduate perspective, that what we're doing here really will add value to the students. It creates a level playing field, so it doesn't matter if you're in Cork or Tullamore, you can all get equal access to companies, whether they're in Dublin or Belfast or Galway or wherever. And it tries to remove like the barriers for a lot of students getting that experience that might be driven by location, the background, what university they go to. So that was a big motivation as well, seeing from the student side. And the other aspect was we spent a lot of time looking at academic research in the areas of what exists. Is it students working in part-time jobs? Does it help? Does it hinder? And there was research in the UK and also from Georgetown University that shows that students who are lucky enough to work in a part-time job related to their studies were amongst the best academic performers, had better networks, and went on to enjoy better careers. Yet the vast majority of students are still kind of working in traditional part-time jobs. And it was also saying it disproportionately impacts lower income students and students from less privileged backgrounds or minority backgrounds who often have to work longer hours to make ends meet. Even if they have a scholarship, their studies suffer because they're paying rent, they're doing everything else, and it negatively impacts their studies. So we just saw this as a great win-win, not just for the students themselves, but also for employers. And a lot of the conversations we've had with employers has been around how this is a much better process than the snapshot you'll get from a CV or from an interview. You can actually evaluate the students based on real observed experience, and you can access a lot more. So for the cost of 4 or 5 students doing a normal internship, you can access 70 students through remote project work.
Wow.
So it changes the dynamic, and while a lot of the bigger companies don't set out to target certain universities, there's certainly safe bets that they've tried, and they continue to go to certain universities and recruit. And this doesn't take away from them, but allows them to cast their net a lot wider, so they can start talking to some of the institutes of technology, some of the regional colleges, etc., that they wouldn't normally would. And tap into a talent pool that they haven't really accessed before. So we see it as a kind of a nice win-win on both sides.
A lot to unpack there. I definitely want to get into Bowsy, but what's your dad's name? Do you want me asking?
Jim Brady. So James Brady. He used to run. It was a Drury in Drury Street. He had the health store there. He actually set up some of the first gyms in gymnasiums. The Apollo Gym was one of them. His company at that stage was called Health and Strength, and he was set up some of the first kind of bodybuilding and weightlifting competitions in Ireland. So he was talking to people like Reg Park, Arnold Schwarzenegger when he was 16 or 17. Reg Park, not as well known, but he was also one of the idols for Arnold Schwarzenegger. So he set up a lot of those bodybuilding competitions. I think it was in St. Francis Hall in Dublin. And that was kind of the start of his career, was kind of in the bodybuilding. I think Dad ended up as being Mr. Leinster or Mr. Ireland in the weightlifting. He was on the Irish Olympic Council as well. He had,
Wow.
wasn't Reg Park, but he had quite a lot of exhibitions with some names that would be very well known, like in the 60s and
In that
70s,
scene, yeah.
before things changed dramatically with the likes of Arnold Schwarzenegger and you know, those more well known coming in. You know, if you look at the black and white photographs of, you know, Dad's generation and the generation that came afterwards, it was night and day. So that was his. He was always like managing his own business right up to the, you know, bringing in natural yogurts and health foods in the 60s, which was arguably well ahead of the trend that
Yeah.
Lanigan came back to Ireland. And he at the end, you know, when he was doing the manufacturing, we were able to benefit from things at the time called the business expansion scheme. So, you know, a lot of the things that we see now, like for entrepreneurs, were becoming available to him. I think it would have been in the late 80s and so forth. He managed to successfully set up his business. He was selling to hospitals in Ireland and in Europe, and I was involved in that. And at that stage, like Dad came from, I think he left school when he was 14 or 15. I was the first guy in the family to go, on Dad's side at least, to go to university. And I was involved in a lot of that because at that stage, when you were dealing with the banks or dealing with anybody else, having somebody with a degree, you know, added a lot of weight. You know, whereas I would have deferred to Dad's 20 years or, you know, 30 years of experience at the time. You know, they very much, you know, also put a lot of weight in the time that, you know, I had a degree and a BCom from University College Dublin. So I helped Dad in that aspect, you know, maybe bringing a bit of kind of structure or strategy or business planning, or put it this way, the language that you would, you know, that the banks were looking for, or, you know, at the time, you know, the local kind of enterprise offices were looking for. So I could help him in the latter end of his career.
Nice.
Yeah, so that was
Well,
a big learning experience for me, and then I ended up in corporate life after that.
shout out to your dad. Talking about corporate life, I know you spent time working abroad, the States in '94, a couple of years in Amsterdam, a couple of years in London, Poland. You've mentioned Iran. What did those years, one working in corporate and two working abroad, teach you? Any lessons or big takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, it gave me a very valuable perspective in terms of people and talent and building teams. And even though you're in kind of very far and different places, you know, when you look at people and, you know, success, you know, there was a lot of common threads throughout the countries, whether you're talking to people in Indonesia or Iran or the UK. And you know, that was something, you know, that is kind of reflected in Bowsy today. You know, we have a very international group. It also gave me a perspective in terms of looking at, you know, seeing opportunities. A lot of what Guy did was either following acquisitions, so going in, helping set up a new company. It was in the innovation side as well, and really seeing being able to spot opportunities. And I mentioned to briefly in a previous conversation about Croatia. You know, when I look at Croatia, I see like Dublin from the 1980s, you know, 1990s. I see so much potential here, and having that perspective from the, I think that kind of perspective that you mightn't have. But it also gives me a very good kind of network, you know, so of people across countries, which I think will help me as we plan, is helping me, and will help me even more so when we start looking at growing the business, you know, not just in Ireland.
Yeah, and just before we get into Bowsy, you've touched on Croatia. I know in a previous conversation you mentioned that you were part of the GAA crowd over there. Are you a Dubs fan?
I am a Dubs fan, but I'm one of the only ones here at the moment. You know, there's a great mixture. There's not that many Irish here. I think we have a Facebook page set up. There's around 200 Irish on the Facebook for Irish in Croatia. there's around 40 or 50 kind of in Zagreb who would be kind of involved in the Irish community here. But it's a great mixture. We have people from all over Ireland. Everyone has a different story. More recently, it's either an Irish guy or an Irish girl that's kind of met, a Croatian and have moved over here.
Mm-hmm.
But then there was a lot of Irish that stayed here after the kind of the civil war that took place here in former Yugoslavia when it broke up, and they kind of stayed on afterwards. So we have people who used to be with the army stationed here with the United Nations. You have a mixture of people who've come over with partners from that they met in Ireland that are Croatian. You have a few entrepreneurs, a few successful Irish businesses here. Interestingly, there's I think one of the biggest independent breweries here in Croatia is kind of run. The operations is run by an Irish guy. One of the top rated kind of craft breweries is run by another Irish guy from Waterford, Simon O'Keefe. And more recently, last weekend, I was in a place called Baranja, which is in Slavonia. It's on the east side of Croatia, and I was there with an Irish guy from Leitrim who set up his own vineyards and is making award-winning Croatian wine there. So there's a really nice eclectic mixture of people, and it's a very supportive community. And that was one of the big reasons why we set up the GAA here. So we now have a team for the hurling and for the Gaelic football, and it's a mixture of Irish and Croatians in the team. And the Croatians are fascinated. Like anytime you see someone walking down with a hurley and a helmet, they're stopped and asked, what they're doing, or if we're practicing, any of the passerbys will stop to watch it. They're fascinated about it. So we've got a match now against a team from Czech Republic coming up on the 3rd of July. They're visiting from Prague. It's the Hibernian Pragues, and we're advertising that now amongst the Croatians here, to come along. It's kind of a family match day, have a look at it, and try and get some more Croatians to join the club. And it's a nice leveler because the Croatians are fantastic at sports, particularly soccer. For such a small sized country, they punch well above their weight. And that could be a bit of a barrier for anyone who wants a friendly kick around, because there's no such thing really as a friendly kick around. They're practicing nearly every day, and this is a nice way for people to get involved. There's no professionals, there's no experts. Everyone has is kind of learning, and it's a nice way to just get out, have a bit of fun. Everyone's learning as they go along, so it's a nice mixture. And I think the age profile of the team is going something from 20 to 42 or 43 years of age. Wow. So it's a nice mix. It's a bit of fun, and everyone's kind of enjoying it, I think.
Amazing. I love to see that. One or two questions around Bowsy, but before I ask that, you've been part of many brand launches. Is there anything that when launching a brand you think some people might overlook, like launching a brand into a new region or just launching a new brand in general, that some people overlook that you don't think they should overlook because it could be detrimental to the success of that launch?
I think it's very much word of mouth. Whether you're in a large company or a small startup like us, the one consistent thing has been the importance of kind of social credibility, word of mouth, and authentic social media, like applying broadcast media rules like you would have had on TV commercials or anything else. And trying to apply that to social media doesn't work. I think getting the trust and having a genuine conversation with people is very, very important. The kind of the one-way broadcast message, doesn't work. And in everything I've been involved in, and even more so with the startup, it's been very much about kind of looking after your reputation, your reviews, your online presence, driving positive word of mouth, meaningful content, and I've worked with some of the biggest global agencies who spend a fortune on doing events and campaigns, etc. And I found that we've been more successful when you kind of engage, on a more meaningful way, on a more human perspective. It's not about, high value, glossy, well produced, images or videos or anything else. It's
Mm.
authenticity that really, really matters. And actually having a social cause in terms of, which is very much what Bowsy is about, is very important. To have a very strong reason why. And that wasn't always in the case for me before, and that's a big part. The other thing is, particularly on the larger companies, is they tend to be very slow at internalizing external innovation. So I was guilty of that as well. When I was on a corporate seat, people will be coming to you with ideas or external ideas, and there's not really a process that supports that in big companies to say, like, John, I want you to do something completely new as part of your objectives this year, apart from your targets and your sales volumes and however they measure you. I want you to do something completely new, bring some new idea into the company. It doesn't matter if it fails or succeeds,
Mm.
but to try to bring something new in. And I've seen that, and that can help a huge amount in terms of, improving your processes, improving, looking at new channels for engaging with people, promoting your product or anything like that. And, I think for a lot of companies now being on the other side of the ground, there's more reasons for them to say no than there is yes, because a lot of them aren't incentivized to bring innovation into a company, and there's more downside if things go wrong. So, if you're the person that brought in an idea that didn't work, I think they're more worried about that scenario than thinking, wow, this is something that's really good, and this could really help, and let's give it a try. And it's usually very low cost, relative to what these companies are spending their money on, but they don't have the structure to support that. And of course, you see big examples. I mean, the famous ones like, for example, even Microsoft missing out on the internet. The Fuji and the Kodaks fighting each other, and not realizing that the HPs, the Apples are going to take over that whole space in terms of digital, media, etc. And a lot of the big companies are so inward focused; they're not looking outwards. And that the big changes are coming from the industry. The majority of them come from outside. The majority of them come from ideas outside. You can see how Revolut is challenging the traditional banking thing. You can see how Stripe in Ireland is doing the same thing with payments. And a lot of these companies, I think, don't have processes in place to internalize these ideas, to drive changes in the business. That was something I think I was guilty of. Maybe not as guilty as everybody else, but it was something I was very conscious of, and I think that's been the experience now. And where I've got a huge amount of support has been more in the SME, the small businesses, Enterprise Ireland, the Guinness Enterprise Centre. It's been those, and the larger companies don't have really the kind of the tools, mechanics, or incentives to kind of react. And I think that of course the pandemic's changed that a lot. But that's a huge opportunity for companies, I think, particularly the larger multinationals, to relook. And it's not just about my business; it's about every other part of the business, and how they're kind of in some ways cut off from external innovation. Like, so one of the big things I was doing in one of my previous roles, I was head of a global innovation centre based in London, and we were looking at kind of very much at open sourced innovation. So rather than going to the guys in the company who were the traditional engineers or the traditional experts, also involving smaller companies, bringing in new ideas and putting out a pitch. Like, so we want, for example, if you want to re-engineer a process or looking at a better way of doing something, putting out a pitch to other companies out there, inviting other companies to get involved. And you'd be amazed about the ideas that you'll get. And, you can also help those companies grow, but at the same time, you benefit from external ideas. And so this whole idea of open source innovation was something I was involved in. Not every company looks at it. They'll focus primarily on their internal R&D, their internal processes, their internal experts. And I guess increasingly now, some of the companies are now looking, because the product development life cycles are changing so fast. You can't afford to be an expert in something if it's going to take you a couple of years to become an expert. And by the time you have that product life cycle has moved on, and you can see that for mobile phones, for example. If you have a product life cycle of over 6 months, it's probably a miracle. So things are moving so fast externally. You have to move away from that over reliance and trying to do everything internally, looking much more at open sourcing, looking much more at getting partnerships, and partnering with that technology rather than trying to reinvent the wheel internally. And that's been it's been a big learning for me as well.
You mentioned something there that I want to touch on. But Bowsy, you've spoke about the creation of Bowsy. I know that it's helped those both students and companies who are looking for a competitive advantage, in my eyes, stand out. I know there's people that have got jobs in Ernst & Young, KPMG, Accenture, just to name a few. But I guess my question is, you mentioned partnerships. So I know that you recently won the Premier League Cup, not the English Premier League, but I assume that with that win, and you can tell people what that cup means, that the United States is a big part of the future plan. So my question is, you mentioned partnerships. How do you continue to grow the brand and raise awareness, assuming that US is part of the future plan? Is it with things like partnerships and content creation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, so that forms a big part of it. And in the early days, when we were looking at going down the funding route, there's lots of conversations, for example, about why are you guys even talking about the United States? Are you guys getting ahead of yourself? You're a small startup in Ireland, and it's true. We are a small startup in Ireland, but all the conversations we're having with the multinational potential partners were, look, I'm not interested in a solution just for Ireland. I need a solution that's going to work for my offices in the US, in the UK, wherever they were. And that's how those conversations started off. That when we were talking about these partnerships with companies, they say, look, even in Ireland, we know we have our own place in the scheme of things. Yes, we have like some big companies here, but they're headquartered in the US, or we have offices, whatever. And that kind of started those early conversations. And one of the big help we've been getting from Enterprise Ireland, not just in Ireland, but also Enterprise Ireland in the USA. And we were involved in some discussions with Enterprise Ireland in San Francisco, and we were selected to participate in a pitch event called the Premier Cup pitch event in the US. And this was the first time, it was us along with some other Irish companies, but this is the first time any Irish company started talking to some of these accelerator partners or programs in the US. And the ones that we were dealing with were a company called People Tech Partners, who are one of the largest accelerators in the HR tech space. So if you look at who their partners are, it's the likes of Netflix, it's Google, it's SAP, Facebook, Udemy. They partner with all of these. And the opportunity for us was like to pitch our business to them, pitch our idea. We had to look at it as well, obviously, in the context of the US, but what we're doing in Ireland and the problem we're solving in the US, in Ireland, is equally applicable in the US. We won that event, and we're now the first Irish startup to join this People Tech Accelerator program ever, coming from Ireland. I think also from Europe. We start that like in September because obviously we're focusing on Ireland. We need to make the business work here, and they see it as a very interesting model because for a startup in the US, the average seed funding is around $3 million. In Ireland, it's around 300,000 euros, and it's not to say that the ideas in the US are 10 times better than Ireland. They're not. The seed funding tends to be a lot higher level. Also, when they launch in the US, there's a lot of visibility in the early seed stages. Everybody in Silicon Valley knows who's doing what. And the conversations we had is this is a very interesting model. Is to kind of validate them. You can get equity relatively cheaply in Ireland compared to the seed funding in the US. You can validate the business model here. You can validate the technology. You can do that a little bit off the radar screen. And then you bring to the US market, probably for Series A, like a fully functioning platform or model that's validated with all the learnings on board. And you take that to the US. And that was something they were kind of very interested in. And the opportunity, because what you see a lot in Ireland is you see a lot of the seed funding take place here. and then a Series A taking place, in the US. And
Mm-hmm.
they saw this as an opportunity. They like the idea as well, and they'll be a big partner. And what they do is they introduce us to companies. They'll help us with our corporate network. They'll introduce us to the right people, etc. And that's a huge plus. Bowsy's also lucky enough. We actually have 3 people on the ground in the US market, and this is through my own network. Professionals in their own rights. One of them is a professor at one of the universities in the US. The other is ex-State Department. He was a colonel in the U.S. Army, and he was with the military attaché. The other is actually working for one of the big departments, the State Department, giving scholarships to underprivileged students, etc. And they're working for us, like albeit on their own time, out of the goodwill that they see that this is a huge opportunity in the U.S. So we're lucky to have kind of 3 people on the ground already in the U.S. Plus, we have this other partnership now with People Tech Partners. And so that allows us to kind of manage the US kind of in parallel to Ireland. So it doesn't distract from the core of the business, which is getting it right in Ireland. But we have the resources and everything else there. And in the next 12 months, we're looking at getting some permanent positions in the US, separate to the Irish business, that allow us to do things in parallel. But what we don't want to do is reinvent the platform in the US. What we want to make sure is what we've developed for Ireland is equally applicable. And that's been very positive so far. Is that for EU, for example, the GDPR legislation, money laundering legislation like PSD2, the bar is much higher in Ireland than in Europe. So whatever we develop for Ireland is equally applicable to the US. There's some differences in tax.
Yeah.
But it means you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And that's been a huge boost to us. It just means that while we're developing everything in Ireland with the European context in mind, we also have the US context in mind as well. So we don't develop something that we can't use there. So we develop it once, we get it right, and we can roll it out other markets and kind of scale relatively quickly, which I think is going to be very important for us as well. So yeah, on the partnership front, that's been hugely kind of valuable to us in Ireland as well. Not to underestimate the role of the likes of Enterprise Ireland or indeed the Guinness Enterprise Centre. So Guinness Enterprise Centre, for example, they've introduced us. So we just finished a project with Tulane University, the executive MBA program, Tulane University in New Orleans, Louisiana.
Okay.
And that was through the Guinness Enterprise Centre. They've been very helpful in introducing us to some of the universities, which is key for us to get in terms of our business model. The first thing is developing partnerships with the universities, and we've been working with UCD and more recently UCC with their career centres. In UCD, it's the Michael Smurfit Graduate School of Business we're talking to mainly, and they've been hugely supportive. I think once they get beyond the idea that this is a company trying to use students, and they understand actually what we're doing is helping students. It's providing a service that isn't there. We're effectively run by students. I'm up until we were joined by Daniel Leia, who's our COO. He's a professor from the IE Business School in Madrid. But up until then, I was the eldest in Bowsy by probably, if I'm kind to myself, around 15 or 16 years. And most of the people we've worked for us are either just recent graduates or like doing their final years of studies. And you mentioned as well, like some of them have gone on to jobs now in Accenture, into Google, other companies, and they've seen the value of that. And we were the only kind of startup invited to the UCD Careers Fair for the Smurfit School. So we were there alongside, I think it was SAP, Microsoft, I think, some of the big Irish employers.
Big names.
And we were there. So I think the universities are hugely important in terms of developing these partnerships, because they see the value that we're adding to the students. It's free for students, it's free for universities, so there's no kind of cost to them, and they see that the value add that we're doing, and consequently have been very important. And also that's really key in our business model as to why somebody else couldn't go ahead and doing this, is having those relationships with the university and having the universities as partners. Is very, very important for us in our model, and we listen to what they have to say to us as well, very much so.
If there was ever to be a book written As in, if you were to ever write a book, what would the front cover title be called?
Probably, why didn't I do it 20 years ago? Probably that's one of the things I look back on. And to put that in
Mm-hmm.
context, I was among one of the first groups of students studying electronic commerce in UCD in the 1990s.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, like, I think I checked at the time. I think I had one of the first of 10,000 websites global. At that time, there was less than 10,000 websites, and
Wow.
it was when you put a website up, I was getting emails from people because the community was relatively small. And this would have been 93 and 94, and you put up a website and people would be sending emails. Like, this is all be in this is the black and white, kind of the black and grey text HTML, and it was that
Mm-hmm.
small people were talking to. And one of the things I was doing my thesis on at the time was about electronic marketplaces, and how e-commerce and online would create a level playing field, so that people could access goods from all over the place. It's coming more from a business perspective to get something getting close to perfect competition, where it would be price competition, yeah, you'd be able to buy stuff. And at that stage, like, that would have been the early days of Amazon, when they were like, a small business. And that was exactly what I was looking at. I ended up taking a safe corporate job. And that was, in some ways, it was reflected also on the fact that I was involved in Dad's business. And
Mm-hmm.
um, I'd experienced the uncertainty of having your own business and the ups and the downs and
Yep.
the reality of that. Mortgages, all the problems that you can think about it. So I experienced the reality of that, and I think that kind of pushed me towards a safer option, not just for me, but for my family, because I was also supporting, to a certain degree, the family and the business and everything else. And from that perspective, I decided, okay, I have some good opportunities. I had a few job offers, and as kind of graduate management trainee jobs and stuff, and I decided to go for that in the end. But looking back at it, looking at the area I was in, and I remember, for example, when we were in university, we found out that they were now getting rid of they were now adding to the domains. Like, at the time there was .edu. It was primarily for university collaboration. I'm sure most of your listeners will know the history of it better than I do. But at that stage, I remember when they were introducing the .com, the .net named our domains, which was
Mm-hmm.
kind of new. So it was very early stages, and I don't know if I would have regretted it at the time, but I really, looking back, and I kind of wished I had done it and gone with my gut instinct. But having said that, I've had a fantastic experience. I was lucky enough to travel the world, and that's why I'm kind of determined to see this through. Is that I couldn't do this twice, and look back, and I knew at the time, and. This time I saw the opportunity. I decided to jump ship, give up a well-paid job and everything else that goes along with it. There's probably a lot more support for someone like me now than there might have been 30 years ago or 25 years ago. Well, actually, 30 years ago, if I'm talking about the 1990s.
That's mad.
And also I have a lot more. I have a very different network, a different perspective, a lot more
Mm-hmm.
experience. So also somewhat consoled by the fact, I think it was Enterprise Ireland were telling me there was some report that came out about the profile of successful entrepreneurs, and a lot of them are in their 40s, so it's not always kind of the necessarily the young people coming out. I'll never know because I missed that opportunity, but I think I'm in a very good position now. I bring a lot of value. And I'm very conscious that I surround myself and the team with a mixture of people. Like I say, we've got 7 different nationalities working for us. We have a huge mixture of experience. We're actually, when you look at the wider team, we're 70% female, which is interesting. That wasn't by design, that was just the process. A lot of it just happened. A lot of females, whether it be university students or anything else, were interested in Bowsy, liked the idea. And it's a very nice place to be, to start off the company. And like, because of the pandemic, a lot of it's been done remotely. So some of the people I haven't met face to face. Obviously that's changing for the better now, and we'll have that opportunity. That in itself was an experience working with different nationalities. All of them
No
Irish
doubt.
students, but a lot of them based. Some of them had to go home, so we had students based in Switzerland, in India, one student based in China, France, UK. And these are all people who would have been studying at Irish universities, who were sent home, went home because of the pandemic, working remotely. So we had all that element, plus the fact it was remote, plus we hadn't met each other. So that was a steep learning curve for us, but it worked. And that was in some way validation of what we were trying to do. We kind of set up a business remotely with people who never met before, working from different countries across the world, basically. So that was a challenge, but I really am looking forward to the face-to-face bit. I don't think we'll ever go back to the traditional kind of corporate or startup structure where we're all sitting around desks. We'll embrace the flexibility and the opportunity we have now, but at the same time, it's still in the extreme position where some of us haven't met. So I'm looking forward to all of us getting together. And I think in August there'll be around 25 or 30 of us from people who are currently working on Bowsy and what we're calling now the Bowsy alumni. So people who were working with Bowsy when they were in university and have now gone on to get jobs. And we're still in touch with all of them. And on social media, they'll give us shout outs. They all feel some kind of a attachment to Bowsy in terms of what we're trying to do, and that's great for us as well. So I'm looking forward to that. Hopefully sometime in August.
Fingers crossed. Final question is, I'd like you to imagine it's now the year 2030 and we're chatting as if we're in 2030 and you're looking back on the last decade. You can answer this personally or professionally, but assuming that it's now the year 2030 and we're looking back, what would you like to be looking back on?
I'd like to see that we actually have made a real difference to students' life and change how corporations look at innovation and how to look at student talent. I think what we're really at the heart of Bowsy, there is a social cause. It is about trying to create equal opportunities. It is about trying to create a level playing field for all students. And from my own experience, hiring students as well, it's not necessarily the ones who are the academic geniuses that are the ones who will succeed. There's plenty of people out there that have initiative, that have drive, etc., that probably are excluded from part of the current process. Or in very simple terms, you might have people who might even have physical disabilities that might prevent them having the mobility to go, or might have certain backgrounds, whatever else. And really, what I really want to do is look back and to have some kind of legacy that we've made a difference in this space. Nobody's excluded from this, and that talent is kind of encouraged and spotted earlier on. And for example, there's no degree for creativity. How do you spot like a creative talent, other than engaging with them? And the other really interesting thing is where a lot of feedback we got from students is they understand through this process where they can add value. So I made up my mind when I was 17 I wanted to do commerce because it was a bit of a catch-all, because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. But there was a bit of accountancy, there was a bit of strategy, there was a bit of marketing in it, and it was kind of keeping my options open. And a lot of students are made to make decisions very early on, really without understanding what they enjoy and what they're good at. We had a guy doing management accountancy who realized he loves this whole creative space. He loves doing blogs, he loves doing social media. And very often, someone in his case, he'll end up like getting accepting the very first job with a good package on it. He'll go into management accountancy, and he never would have realised that there's a whole other area out there where he can really add value, exceed. And I think what it will do as well is really allow students to make more informed decisions. And to understand what they enjoy and what they can add value. And that's a big thing, because sometimes you find it out too late, in life, and that's really my legacy that I'd like to see for Bowsy. And obviously I want to see us on an international stage, so I'd like to see Bowsy, not just in the US and in Ireland, but in Europe, within markets like Asia, etc. And that's exciting conversations we're having now. Is like, how do if we crack this model, same as an Uber, for example, that they've cracked it one or two markets, and then they have a model where they'll bring in a local country manager. Here's the platform. We'll help you engage in terms of the legislation, etc. And very quickly you can scale, and that's what I'd like to see as well for Bowsy, is that kind of approach where we have a platform that will translate across many different countries. That we have a business model and a network of partners and universities that we can kind of expand very quickly across markets. And I'd really like to see us, in 10 years, to be global and to be seen to be making a real difference, to student lives, and people looking back at the pre-pandemic times as kind of remember when, you had to physically go for a job interview, or remember when, that's what I'd love to see.
And I have no doubt there's probably people scattered across the world who don't know that Bowsy is going to have a massive impact on the direction of their career, because they'll have gotten to taste different areas rather than jump straight into their career. So what you're doing is a fantastic thing. And I can probably say that you'll be sitting at a bar one day and someone might come up to you and say, "Thank you for Bowsy. It changed the direction of my life." And I assume more than one person will tell you that throughout your lifetime. But for spending the last 45, 55 minutes with me, I've thoroughly enjoyed getting to know you and everything you've done. I wish you nothing but the best going forward. I hope your move back to Ireland is safe, and enjoy the last couple of weeks out in Zagreb.
Thanks very much, Rian. Really enjoyed talking to you too as well. Very interesting. I've never had a chance to talk about my dad and his business, so I really enjoyed that. And it's not something I've discussed before, but appreciate the opportunity